Halloween is the time of year when the line between the world of the living and the supernatural becomes blurry. When all manner of ghouls, ghosts, and goblins come out to prey on us puny humans.
And last year, we talked about how the ancient Egyptians did in fact have something rather similar to Halloween. Except that it took place at the end of their calendar year during those 5 last days at the end that were liminal and during which all kinds of supernatural creatures could come forth from the land of the beyond into the world of the living to wreak all kinds of havoc. This year, we're going to talk about a bona fide ancient Egyptian ghost story. I'm an Egyptologist and I answer your ancient Egypt questions. This ancient Egyptian ghost story was written down in 1200 BC in the 19th dynasty during the early Ramessid period. And it is absolutely fascinating. It's got so many interesting things that shed light on ancient Egyptian religion, funerary beliefs, and incredibly, so many themes and tropes, you could say, that appear that are actually part and parcel of what a modern audience can expect of a ghost story. Now, just a couple of things I should mention. This ghost story is preserved on several fragments of pottery sherds called ostraca, and unfortunately, because of that, the beginning of the text is missing, as is the end, along with certain parts in the middle, but thankfully, enough survives that we can actually get a very good sense of what this story is all about. Now, setting the scene. The main protagonist is Khonsu-Emhab. He was a high priest of the god Amun, and he seems to have been informed about this restless spirit, a ghost, if you will, and he's on a mission to set things right. So, without further ado, the story. So Khonsu-Emhab has heard of this restless spirit, and the story begins in the middle of the action. It doesn't begin. The part that survives begins here. So Khonsu-Emhab, according to his habit, he ferried across and reached his house. He caused offerings to be prepared, saying, "I will provide him," that is to say the deceased, "with all sorts of good things when I go to the west side." He went up onto the roof of his house and invoked the gods of the sky and the gods of the land, southern, northern, western, and eastern, and the gods of the necropolis, saying to them, "Send me that august spirit." And so he came and said to him, "I am your who must go to rest at nightfall next to his tomb." So Khonsu-Emhab summons the restless spirit, and he actually does appear and says something very interesting that sheds so much light on ancient Egyptian funerary beliefs, that is to say, beliefs about the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians had several conceptions of souls. They had different kinds, basically. Each person, your personhood was made up of several things together. But the closest thing to our understanding that the ancient Egyptians had to a soul was what they called the Ba. The Ba they depicted with essentially your head, but the body of a bird. That's not to be taken literally. It's just symbolic of freedom, flight, freedom of movement, liberty in that sense. And what the ancient Egyptians believed was that the Ba could travel outside the tomb only during daytime. Just as the sun rose, reborn anew, quite literally, in the eastern horizon, so at the same time the soul could be reborn with it, leaving the body, exiting the tomb, and flying around in the sky, basking in the sunlight, and enjoying the world of the living once more, perhaps even watching upon and making sure his descendants are safe and well. Come nighttime, however, or as it says here, nightfall, they go back to the tomb just as the sun is dying in the western horizon. So must the soul actually return to the tomb and reunite with the corpse. The story continues. Then the high priest of Amun, Khonsu-Emhab, said to him, "Please, tell me your name, your father's name, and your mother's name, that I may offer to them and do for them whatever has to be done for those who are in their position." This again tells us something else that's fascinating about ancient Egyptian religion, and that is, you presented offerings not only to gods, but to the deceased as well. That's why the ancient Egyptians built tombs. It wasn't just to put the body in it and that's it. Tombs were more than the final resting place of the deceased, as incredibly important as that is, because one of their main roles was in fact to keep the body protected. The whole reason the ancient Egyptians mummified their dead was actually because they believed the body had to be preserved in order for the soul to live on in the beyond. But the second other main function of the tomb was, it was the stage where descendants, priests, and passers-by could present offerings to the deceased. So ancient Egyptian tombs had two parts: the restricted, sealed off, final burial place, and the other half that's actually meant to be visited. The place where there's an altar, where you would present offerings to the deceased, because without continued sustenance, whether it's just simply through prayer and not necessarily offerings, the soul could not live on. And that's what this text already makes very clear. Khonsu-Emhab is asking for their names so that he can present offerings to them. The august spirit then said to him, "Nebu Semech is my name, Ankhmen is my father's name, and Diotiemshas is my mother's name." So now Khonsu-Emhab, equipped with this knowledge, can ensure that these souls can live on for eternity. Then the high priest of Amun-Re, king of the gods, Khonsu-Emhab, said to him, "Tell me what you want, and I will have it done for you. And I will have a sepulchre prepared anew for you, and have a coffin of gold and ziziphus wood made for you, and you shall rest therein. And I will have done for you all that is done for one who is in your position," meaning someone who is deceased. All that is expected to be done for someone who's deceased. The august spirit then said to him, "No one can be overheated who is exposed in the wintry wind, hungry without food." Gap. "It is not my desire to overflow like the inundation." Gaps. "There have been made to me promises." Another gap. Clearly, and we'll see this later, promises had been made to the deceased, Nebu Semech. What were they? We'll find out. Now after he had finished speaking, Khonsu-Emhab sat down and wept beside him. So often in ancient Egyptian texts, what we get is so-and-so said this to other person said this in return, and so on. But every now and then, we get this something extra, this descriptive, small thing that adds just so much more humanity to it. And all it says here is, Khonsu-Emhab sat down beside the spirit of Nebu Semech and wept. Such a human touch. Just a few words. And this already reveals something that you wouldn't necessarily expect in a ghost story in modern times. To the ancient Egyptians, an encounter with an otherworldly spirit was not an eerie or spooky experience. On the contrary, the ancient Egyptians knew that the spirits were all around them. They approached them like they did anything else. Gods, people, anything. If I were to only read this section out to you, would you have even thought at all that this is a crazy experience where somebody is actually sitting down next to a spirit, a ghost? You wouldn't. That's because it was, I wouldn't say mundane, but to the ancient Egyptians, it was not a scary experience. To them, this is just someone who's deceased and who's having trouble, basically, because he's restless and he's weeping for him, saying, "How badly you fare without eating or drinking, without growing old or becoming young, without seeing sunlight or inhaling northerly breezes. Darkness is in your sight each day. You do not get up early to leave." So what we have here is a description of the state of this soul, the Ba, as we talked about. Instead of being able to leave the tomb, separate itself from the body in the daytime, bask in the sunlight and enjoy freedom and experience the world of the living, it is in the tomb, darkness in its sight each day. It does not get up early to leave. That is to say, it does not wake up in the morning to actually fly out of the tomb. And this is not the way of things. Then the spirit said to him, and this is crucial. Although in a modern ghost story, we would think that an encounter with a ghost is a terrifying, or at the very least, odd, otherworldly experience. What we also do expect is, at some point, one of the main cruxes of any ghost story is finding out whose ghost this is. Who were they in life? And that's what we get here, in fact. Something that is so part and parcel of a ghost story now is actually something that we get already from 1200 BC. That's because this is, at the end of the day, a human tale. We are all humans and we want to understand the experiences of others. So when we see someone who's troubled, we want to know their story. And that person may in fact be also deceased. We want to hear their story. Who are they? "When I was alive upon earth, I was overseer of the treasury of King Mentuhotep, living, prosperous, and healthy. And I was lieutenant of the army, having been at the head of men and nigh to the gods. I went to rest in year 14 during the summer months of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Mentuhotep, living, prosperous, and healthy." So he passed away in the 14th year of this king. He continues, "He gave me my 4 canopic jars and my sarcophagus of alabaster, and he had done for me all that is done for one in my position. He laid me to rest in my tomb with its shaft of 10 cubits. See, the ground beneath has deteriorated and dropped away. The wind blows there and seizes a tongue." The expression "seizes a tongue" is obscure, so we don't really get it. But it's clear that the tomb is in very bad shape. Apparently, the floor has fallen away, revealing the underground section of the tomb where the body lay. And that, as we said earlier, is not meant to be visited. It is meant to be kept away, hidden away, to protect the body. And now, the wind blows there. It is exposed to the elements. "Now, as for your having promised me," quote, within a quote, "I shall have a sepulchre prepared anew for you," end quote, "I have it 4 times already that it will be done in accordance with them. But what am I to make of the promises you have also just made to me, so that all these things may succeed in being executed?" Remember we said that Nebuchadnezzar mentioned that promises had been made to him? Well, this is where we find out what those are. 4 times now, people promised Nebuchadnezzar that they would fix his tomb, but nobody actually went through with it. So, then the high priest of Amun-Re, king of the gods, Khonsu-Em-Hab, said to him, "Please express to me a fine commission, such as is fit to be done for you, and I will surely have it done for you. Or I will simply have 5 men, that is to say servants, and 5 maidservants, totaling 10, devoted to you in order to pour libation water for you, and I will have a sack of emmer delivered daily to be offered to you. And also the overseer of offerings will pour libation water for you. You'd think that Nebu Semech, the deceased, would be very pleased to hear this, but he isn't. Then the spirit of Nebu Semech said to him, "Of what use are the things you would do? Unless a tree is exposed to sunlight, it does not sprout foliage. But stone never proceeds to age. It crumbles only through..." And then a long gap follows in the text. What can we understand from what was being said here? Why is Nebu Semech not satisfied with the promise that Khonsu Emhab, the high priest, is making to him, saying that he will institute offerings to be presented to him? You'd think he'd have sustenance for his soul and be pleased with that, but apparently that's not enough. What I personally think is being said here is he's saying, unless a tree is exposed to sunlight, unless my tomb is fixed, it does not sprout foliage. It is not going to bear fruit. All these offerings that can be instituted for me, they're not going to have the desired result that my soul will live on forever. Because to begin with, the tomb itself is not intact. The burial place is exposed to the elements. The ground has fallen away. So present offerings if you like, sure, but to put it colloquially, first things first. You have to fix the tomb first before you can actually present the offerings. Then after a long gap, what we have is the high priest of Amun-Ra, king of the gods, that is Khonsu Emhab, commissioned 3 men, each one, gap, and he ferried across and went up, gap. The men searched for the tomb near the holy temple of King Neb-Hepetre, living, prosperous, healthy. The son of Re, Mentuhotep, living, prosperous, and healthy. And they found, gap, in it, being 25 cubits distant along the king's causeway at Jezret. This is a fascinating passage. This kind of story would have been read out to an eager audience, and they all would have been very familiar with the landscape they're talking about here. And that is the west bank of Luxor, modern-day Thebes, where the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens are, where the massive funerary memorial temples of the kings are, where the noblemen were buried, and everybody else. The ancient Egyptians would have gone there on festival days to visit the tombs of their ancestors, and it's a festival occasion, so they knew all these places. They would have walked past the massive royal monuments, including the monument mentioned here, King Mentuhotep's funerary temple in Jezret, that is to say, Dir el-Bahari. This little known monument actually survives to this day, and it is right next to Hatshepsut's famous temple. Right there next to it, they're talking about that tomb/temple of Mentuhotep II, and apparently Nebu Semech, the restless deceased individual, was buried not far from there. And the figure, the king being talked about here, is, as you might have guessed, also very real. King Mentuhotep II lived in around 2000 BC. He's the founder of the Middle Kingdom, the king who reunited Egypt, initiating the kingdom into another prosperous period. Mentuhotep II, as I said, was in 2000 BC. This story, at least this particular text that we know it from, dates to around 1200 BC. This text is referring to a king who lived 800 years before this time. 800 years, 8 centuries. Really picture that. That's how long-lived ancient Egyptian civilization was. Mentuhotep II founded the Middle Kingdom. There's still 1,000 years plus of ancient Egyptian history prior to that even. If I were to talk about here, right now, in, let's round it up and say 2000 AD, a story taking place in 1200 AD, 800 years ago. 1200 AD. This is the kind of time gap we are talking about here. With, in the early 19th dynasty, say, let's say Ramses II's reign, we're talking about a king who had lived 800 years before. The time spans involved in ancient Egyptian history truly boggle the mind. The story continues. Then they went back down to the riverbank, and they returned to the high priest of Amun-Ra, king of the gods, Khonsu-Emhab, and found him officiating in the god's house of the temple of Amun-Re, king of the gods. That's Karnak Temple. That's a place that also survives to this day, and you can in fact go visit it in Luxor. He said to them, quote, "Hopefully, you've returned having found the excellent place for making the name of that spirit called Nebu Semech endure unto eternity." Then the three of them said to him with one voice, "We have found the excellent place for making the name of that august spirit endure." And so they sat down in his presence and made holiday, that is, say, banqueted. They sat down, talked, had a great time. His heart became joyful when they told him, Gap, the sun came up from the horizon. So basically, apparently, they talked all night. They had a good time chatting, probably exchanging stories. Then he summoned the deputy of the state of Amun, Menkau, and informed him about his project. He returned in the evening to sleep in the city, and he... The rest of the text is lost. We can be fairly certain that Khonsu-Emhab, in fact, having located, having known, having found out where the tomb of Nebu Semech is, what he did was he went to retrieve the contents, and he would have built a tomb for him, and he would have transferred everything into that, thus guaranteeing Nebu Semech an eternal existence in the afterlife, thus pacifying this restless spirit. Fascinating. It's also a part of ghost stories that the restless spirit either tells someone who's alive, or that person who's alive finds out what it is that will let the deceased find peace. And that's exactly what we have here. And you also have, of course, the deceased talking about himself during his lifetime, who he was. And we also have of course, the basic theme here of a restless spirit to begin with. So many things that we might think modern, or a modern ghost story. But really, here they are in a story from 1200 BC, a story that is 3,200 years old. And in this story, we are also blessed to have so much insight, thanks to it, on ancient Egyptian beliefs in the afterlife. It's a good story. With that being said, I know I haven't made videos in a very long time, probably around a year now. And the reason for that is, those close to me know that my family and I went through a very rough time where we lost two people very dear to us in very close succession. It was a very rough time. They were taken from us too soon. But they were both always encouraging me to make videos. They always gave me such kind words for them, such kind feedback as well. They always encouraged me to do more. So I guess I'm dedicating this video to them and all future videos as well. And speaking of future videos, the next one is going to be a topic that is very, very dear to me. It's going to be chock full of ancient Egyptian religion, mythology, and we'll be talking about essentially one of the most iconic symbols of all of ancient Egyptian culture. So, look forward to it, and until then, whatever time you were watching this video, I hope you had a wonderful day, and I hope that the next day is going to be even better.